People often say that prostitution is the oldest job in the world. Torture and death must come in a close second, though. Archaeologists have found proof of executions among nomadic peoples in the Neolithic period, which was before society. It's not clear if these old bones tell the story of sacrifices to ancient gods or the willful killing of undesirables, but it is clear that killing people has been a part of the human mind since the beginning of modern human behavior. Putting people to death is still done in many countries and cultures today. Torture and other painful ways of killing people have also been around for a very long time. Getting violent with enemies is a normal instinct for all animals, and people are no different. As humans developed better tools, they also got smarter at finding new ways to hurt or kill other people. As we will see in this list, society has come up with some truly horrible ways to punish bad people. These practices are mostly now only found in stories and legends, but some are still done in some parts of the world in the 21st century. Are you sitting down well? Being sewn inside a dead horse. This was an easy way to kill people that worked well. The person would first have their limbs broken so they couldn't get away, and then they would be squished and sewn into the stomach of a dead horse. After being killed, the body would be left outside the city to rot and be eaten by jackals, wild dogs, wolves, or ravens, depending on where in the world the practice was happening. So, they would eat the victim while they were still alive, if they weren't already suffocating from the smell of the horse's body breaking down. Really disgusting. In the early days of Christianity, this was a usual punishment. Nero is accused of doing horrible things to Christian martyrs. Lucian's Dialogues of the Dead describes an ancient Greek form that Christians had to deal with. Lucian writes that there was a group of people talking about how to punish and kill a Christian woman in the cruelest way possible. They decided to put her inside a dead ass, leaving only her head showing. They thought that the hot Greek sun would roast her in its belly, that birds would eat her alive, and most importantly, that she would entirely fail to destroy herself. The brazen bull would cook people alive. Perillus of Athens made up the brazen bull for Phalidrus, the cruel king of Sicily. It looks like Phalaris was tired of the usual ways of killing people and was looking for something more cruel and fun. Perillus was happy to oblige. In line with its name, the brazen bull was a sculpture made of metal that looked like a male cow. The art was hollow, and there was a trap door in the back that people could use to get inside. A fire was started under the bull, and the poor person who lived there would be cooked alive. The metal brass was picked because it gets hot quickly. Another part of the brazen bull shows a key part of torture and death, for Perillus gave the bull a system of lines that led to open nostrils. This way, the victim's screams of pain could come out of the nose, making everyone happy. The sound was called the most melodious bellowing by Perillus. Lucian, a scholar, says that even Phalaris didn't like the instrument, so he asked Perillus to show him how it sounded. When Perillus got inside, Phalaris locked the trapdoor and cooked him. After Perillus was taken away, he was put to a more gentle death. There was no hypocrisy in Phalaris. When Phalaris's people got tired of his violence, they tore out his tongue and cooked him in the brazen bull. This must have made Perillus happy after he died in the underworld. Early church historians say that the bull was also used by Roman rulers to kill Christian martyrs. Antipas, Pelagia the Virgin, Eustachius, and Eustachius's wife and children were all killed in the bull. A Roman leader named Burdunellus was also killed by King Alaric II of the Visigoths in 497 AD. He was killed by being cooked in a form of the brazen bull. Keelhauling would drown or maim victims. On to the golden age of piracy, when a makeshift nautical method of execution made a lot of desperate crooks with eye patches and parrots happy. People say that sailors are tough, and in order to keep things running smoothly on ships that were out at sea for months at a time, punishments had to be extra harsh and teach others a lesson. A person who did something wrong was tied to a rope and pulled under the ship, the keel. The person usually drowned or, if they were very lucky, got serious injuries from the barnacles under the ship, which would usually become fatally infected. But, despite what people think, keelhauling wasn't just something pirates did. Most naval forces in the 18th century used this method. In 1710, an English sailor was keelhauled for slander and was described as being stripped of all his clothes except for a strip of cloth around his loins. A weight of lead or iron was hung upon his legs to sink him. Then let it fall quickly into the water, going under the ship's bottom. After a short time, it was raised on the other side of the ship. This was said more than once, after sufficient periods of breathing. Few could last long sitting on the witch's billy goat. The witch's billy goat was a type of torture that could be fatal. It got its name from the fact that it was used to get accused witches to confess, since witches were thought to ride goats instead of horses. The tool, which was also called the Judas cradle, was a wide, rough-hewn pyramid of wood on a stick. Naked people were lowered onto it with ropes. One end of the pyramid would go into the victim's vagina, scrotum, or anus, and if they sat on it for long enough, it might be possible to cut them in half. The pain that followed almost certainly led to a confession, whether it was true or not. Cleaving would take a long time, sometimes even days, because of the ropes and the width of the tower. Because the pyramid was so wide, it was also hard to fully impale someone. More on that later. Instead, the focus was on slowly cutting the victim in half. People who were too light to be hurt by the billy goat were sometimes tied down with weights on their feet. People say that the Spanish Inquisition invented the witch's billy goat, which is a questionable claim. However, word of how well the device worked made it popular across Europe starting in the 1600s. Being boiled alive was even more horrible than it sounds. Common practice involved putting criminals in a pot of boiling water over a blazing fire and watching them writhing in pain for hours. This was a simple but effective way to kill people in the most painful way possible. The person being boiled alive would be cooked from the outside in, and current accounts of people falling into hot springs make it sound like they would be awake for most of the ordeal. The smell of cooking meat would also be fun for mean people who were nearby. The body would also turn red and burn, and it would hurt so much to breathe the hot air. In England in the 1600s, at least 3 people were put to death this way for killing other people. After Richard Rouse, the Bishop of Rochester's cook, was found guilty of trying to kill his boss, Henry VIII passed an Act of Parliament that okayed the method. All and every person or persons which hereafter shall be indicted and condemned by order of the law of such treason, poisoning, shall be immediately after such attainder or condemnation committed to execution by death, by boiling for the same. Henry's law was unbelievably cruel. Because it was so new, Rouse's public boiling at Smithfield drew record crowds. But on the continent, people were often boiled alive. Between the 1300s and 1600s, coiners, people who cut coins into smaller pieces and melted them down to make new money, were cooked alive in France and Germany. In Asia, Japanese thief Goemon Ishikawa was boiled alive. And in 1675 in Delhi, Sikh hero Bhai Dhyala was also boiled alive for refusing to become a Muslim. Abu Abud al-Rakawi, a former leader of ISIS, said in 2017 that the terrorist group boils enemies alive in engine oil. This is very disturbing. Being flayed alive was once more than just a parental threat. "I'll skin you alive" is a phrase that older people love to use to scold kids who are being bad. It comes from a very frightening and real place. People were killed by taking their whole skin, which was a very painful process. Depending on the person, being skinned alive could kill them through shock, illness, blood loss, or lack of heat. Carvings from the Iron Age in Mesopotamia, from about 883 BC onward, show people flaying their enemies. The Rassam cylinder, which was made around 636 BC and is now in the British Museum, talks about a very gross habit. They stripped off their skins and covered the city wall with them. The Mesopotamians were not the only ones who did this horrible thing, though. Flaying someone alive has long been linked to religious intolerance. For example, the Torah says that the Romans did this to Rabbi Akiva because he was teaching. Saint Bartholomew is the most well-known Christian victim for being flogged before he was crucified. Greek intellectual Hypatia of Alexandria was flogged alive by a group of angry Christian monks in 415 for being a heretic. Also, in 1199, Pierre Basile was skinned alive because he shot the arrow that killed King Richard I of England at the siege of Chalus. The horror of crucifixion. The cross and crucifix are so common around the world that they take away from the truth of being crucified. Jesus was the most famous person to be put to death in this way, if he existed, but let's not talk about that right now. But many others also died the same way. After being flogged, the condemned would take the cross, or part of it, to the place where they would be put to death, just like in the New Testament story. Then, their hands would be tied or nailed to the crossbeam that was lying flat on the ground and was put up with ropes. So that the victim's weight wouldn't tear the wrists off the beam, a block of wood, suppledanum, would be put under their feet and tied or nailed in place. As in the New Testament, the condemned were hit from below, and honey was sometimes spread on their faces to draw bugs. The person who was being crucified would die of weariness, heart failure, pulmonary embolism, or not being able to breathe after days of being there. From the time of the ancient Greeks onwards, the crucifixion was only used for the worst criminals. It was a handy, obvious way to stop people from breaking the law. In 345 AD, the Christian Emperor Constantine made crucifixion illegal in Rome. However, it went on for hundreds of years in other parts of the world. Even in Christian France, the last person to be put to death on a cross wasn't until 1127, when Bertholda was put to death for killing Emperor Charles the Righteous. Crucifixion is mostly linked to ancient Rome, and it was used in Japan and Burma in more recent centuries. Sadly, a number of people have been killed in Saudi Arabia in this century. In 2013, the sentences of thieves who were supposed to be crucified were changed. Guilty of treason against the country will get you hanged, drawn, and quartered. In medieval England, the way people were put to death depended on their social class. People who were aristocrats were killed for murder, while people who were commoners were hung. People who planned to overthrow the king or queen or the country as a whole, on the other hand, would be hanged, drawn, and quartered. The last person to be hanged, drawn, and quartered was Robert Emmet in 1809. The execution has its roots in the Middle Ages, so the best example is the sentence given to Major General Thomas Harrison in 1660. Dragged upon a hurdle to the place of execution, and then you shall be hanged by the neck, and being alive shall be cut down, and your privy members to be cut off, and your entrails to be taken out of your body, and you living, the same to be burnt before your eyes, and your head to be cut off, your body to be divided into 4 quarters, and head and quarters to be disposed of at the pleasure of the King's Majesty. Harrison was convicted of having King Charles I executed after the restoration of the monarchy. Treason was treated the same way for everyone, no matter what class they were in. Though many people were killed in this way, William Wallace for his part in the Scottish Wars of Independence, Hugh le Despencer for his alleged affair with Edward II, John Ball for his role in the Peasants' Revolt, Edmund Campion as a Catholic martyr, and Guy Fawkes for the Gunpowder Plot, are the most well-known. A lot of people watched these killings because the traitors were famous and the punishments were horrifying to watch. As a warning, their heads were often put along London Bridge. The strappado would dislocate your shoulders and most likely kill you. There are 3 types of strappado torture, and all of them are unbelievably horrible. The person in the first picture had their arms tied behind their backs and a thick rope around their wrists that was connected to a ceiling beam or hook. The executioner would then just pull on the rope, lifting the condemned person up by their hands. This would cause unbearable pain and often cause the arms and shoulders to dislocate because the shoulder sockets were holding the whole body. It is possible to add weights to the body to make the pain even worse. Those who lived were often disabled or had ligament damage that could not be fixed. There were a few sudden drops from a very high place added to the second version, which was otherwise the same. When the victim's fall was stopped, they felt painful jerks that would normally break their shoulders. The third version tied the hands to the front and put a heavy object on the bound feet, which also caused the legs to become dislocated. As its name suggests, the strappado was made in Italy. Niccolò Machiavelli and Girolamo Savonarola may have been tortured with it. It was also used by the Nazis in prison camps during the Second World War to punish people who didn't follow orders. Impalement has been used since ancient Mesopotamia to kill people slowly. It has been done since at least the Code of Hammurabi, which is a Mesopotamian set of laws from around 1772 BC. There are two main types of impalement, which is when someone is killed by putting a sharp object into their body. Longitudinal impalement. A pointed stake was put into the victim's anus so that it went up and down the body, ideally so that the tip of the stake came out of the mouth, as shown above, or chest cavity. For transversal impalement, the stake was pushed through any part of the body to the other side, like the gut or heart. Impalement patients could live for a few seconds or several days, depending on the type of impalement and the organs that were damaged. In history, there are many cases of leaders who were known for putting enemies on spikes. Before he put people to death, Emperor Nero would make them dig their own graves and put a stake in the ground. But Vlad Tepes, also known as the Impaler, was the most famous impaler in history. To scare off his enemies, he built a forest of 20,000 skewered Turks, and one time he ate dinner while dozens of Transylvanian Saxons were being impaled in front of him. The Scavenger's Daughter. During Henry VIII's rule, the Scavenger's Daughter was created, and people were also punished by being boiled alive. The Scavenger's Daughter, a demon-possessed tool for crushing people, was meant to be used to get statements. It worked best when used in combination with the torture rack, which horribly stretched people. The mean person who made it, Sir Leonard Skevington, the Lieutenant of the Tower of London, gave it a name that isn't quite what it sounds like. The original name was Skevington's Daughter. Even though it wasn't used very often, the gadget was really scary. For the most part, the Scavenger's Daughter was made up of iron rings that were linked together in two places. The suspect was first made to kneel down as if they were praying, and then they were told to squeeze themselves as tightly as they could. The torturer would kneel on the victim's back and wrap one of the rings around their feet. Then, the other ring would be wrapped around the small of their back and finally around their neck. If they were stuck in this position for up to 90 minutes, blood would fill their chests and then shoot out of their ears, nose, and anus. Not many people could wait that long before admitting something. Being broken on the wheel would break your bones and rupture your vital organs. One of the most important inventions in human history was the wheel, but it was also very good at hurting people. The Roman Emperor Commodus is said to have used it as a form of torture. He would tie a wheel, either horizontally or vertically, to the body of a victim, and then have someone hit it with a large mallet, breaking their bones. Tying someone to the edge of a heavy wheel and rolling it over them to break bones and rip open organs was another common way to torture people. Saint Catherine was the most famous person to be tortured in this way, and the spinning firework is named after her. Europeans stopped killing Christians in the end, but they couldn't give up such a fun activity, so they started putting other people to death or torturing them on the wheel. In the Middle Ages, the main change made to torture was to make it more interesting for the public to watch. The offenders were then tied to the spokes of a wheel that was raised on a scaffold so that onlookers could get the best view possible as an executioner carefully broke each limb with an iron bar. The final blow was to the head or heart, leaving a grimy, bloody mess. The Scaphismus. Scaphismus, which was also called the boats, was an old Persian way of killing people that was slow, painful, and humiliating. The 12th century Byzantine historian Ioannis Zonaras writes about how the soldier Mithridates was put to death Two boats are joined together and stacked on top of each other. Holes are cut in the boats so that only the victim's head, hands, and feet are visible. They put the man who is going to be punished on his back inside one of these boats and then use bolts to connect the boats together. Next, they pour a mixture of milk and honey into the wretched man's mouth till he is filled to the point of nausea, smearing his face, feet, and arms with the same mixture, and so leave him exposed to the sun. Flies, wasps, and bees, attracted by the sweetness, miserably torment and sting the wretched man. Moreover, his belly, distended as it is with milk and honey, throws off liquid excrements, swarms of worms. Thus, the victim lying in the boats, his flesh rotting away in his own filth and devoured by worms, dies a lingering and horrible death. The heretic's fork. Let's not forget about the Spanish Inquisition. They were good guys. In the end, all they were doing was getting rid of bad people for the good of both the bad people and everyone else. People were only put to death so that they could do punishment for a while in the hopes that things would get better for them in the next life. The people who were hurt must have been very thankful. Anyway, the Inquisition used some very cruel and sneaky ways to torture people to make sure that the punishment was enough to please God and that they would give honest confessions. This is what the heretic's fork was like. There were 2 points on each end of the heretic's fork, which was made of iron. It was around the victim's neck while they were on their knees, with one end pressed into their chest and the other into the skin around their chin. Because the ends were sharp, they pushed the head up, which made it impossible to talk. If someone fell asleep, the fork would go through their head and chest, killing them. But this was all very nice, because this was a prayer pose that let the captives pray to God without being heard. Many thanks, Inquisition. The scold's bridle. Although it may not have been the most painful thing on this list, the scold's bridle, also known as a branx, was a potent mix of sexism, physical pain, and public shame. The scold's bridle was an iron frame that was put over the head of a female victim. A piece of iron was forced into the mouth to stop the tongue from moving, which stopped rumours from spreading, husbands from being nagged, or spells from being cast. The subject had to wear the bridle in public for it to be effective, and some of them were very fancy and had silly ears and other parts to make the effect stronger. Since it was made of iron, the scold's bridle was very heavy and meant to be very painful to wear. Some examples that are still around were even crueler than the ones listed above. By adding nails or just roughening up the iron object that was shoved under the tongue, it could be changed to cause terrible injuries. In these cases, the woman who was punished could not get away from having her tongue cut off or her mouth cut open, which could have caused a fatal illness or made it impossible for her to speak again. Even if they weren't hurt, people in the small, close-knit communities of the past would always feel bad about being punished in this way. The torture rack could tear off limbs and rupture organs. The torture rack is mostly used to get information out of people, but it could also be used to kill someone, either on purpose or by accident. The torture rack was just a simple wooden frame with a bunch of rollers that were connected with ropes. The person was put on the rack with their legs spread out and tied with ropes that could be strengthened with a lever. The result was to stretch the body beyond what it could normally do, which caused the limbs to move out of place or even cut off. People died from either not getting enough blood or having their organs overstretched and breaking. The Romans came up with the idea for the torture rack, which was used all over Europe in the Middle Ages and early modern times whenever there was a plot or heresy. For hundreds of years, the rack was both well known and feared as an instrument. In the 1600s, Baron Scanner of Bohemia was accused of heresy and given the harsh punishment of being beaten on the rack to get him to confess and give the names of his criminal partners. He was so scared that he cut off his own tongue to stay away from it. In a cruel move, the court changed his sentence to being put to death on the torture rack. Baron, good try. Some people were tortured by having their flesh torn off with red-hot pincers. The creation of pincers was another important technological step forward for humans, just like the wheel. They made sure that people could handle red-hot metals, which meant that iron could be worked to make things like swords, buckles, and finally cannons. But because they could stand up to high heat, they were used as a cruel and very painful way to torture people. To make things even worse, torturers could heat the pincers very high until they lit up red, then pinch off pieces of skin from a victim and tear them off. For this job, regular blacksmith's pincers were changed by being spiked or pointed. Red-hot pincers were also the most painful way to cut off a criminal's sperm. Even though it's most often used to get statements or information out of people, tearing flesh could cause fatal infections or cut off arteries. Sometimes boiling liquids would be put into the cuts to make them hurt even more. Pincer torture was often part of a more complex murder. Michel Foucault talks about the famous execution of robber François Damiens, who tried to kill Louis XV but failed. His body was torn apart by horses after his skin was torn off in some places with red-hot pincers. The wounds were then filled with molten lead and sulfur. Some people were eaten alive by rats. Rats will eat almost anything, alive or dead. There are a lot of stories about people who were partly eaten by rats after a fall or heart attack that didn't kill them. This used to be seen as helpful to the government in many countries, not annoying. In Elizabethan times, there was a cell at the Tower of London that was called the Dungeon of Rats. It was below the level of the River Thames. When the tide came in, rats in the area would sneak into the cell to get out of the rising water and eat the hurt, chained prisoner for free. In the 1600s, during the Dutch revolt against Spain, the rebellious Dutch leader Diederik Sonoy did not want to leave anything to chance. This was in contrast to the English, who were happy to look the other way and let the rats do their horrible thing. They were chained to a table, and he would put a caged rat on top of them and heat it up. The rat would furiously try to get away from the unbearable heat by digging down through the person's chest. Sonoy got important information about the Spanish moves this way, and he probably also learned a lot about how rodents live. Death by 1,000 cuts. To the people of China, death by 1,000 cuts was known as Ling Chi and was practiced there well into the 1980s. In this way of killing someone, they were tied to a cross and put on a table with a box of very sharp knives, each with a different part of the body written on it. The knives were covered with a cloth. As if it were a cruel lottery, the executioner would put his hand in the basket and pick a knife at random. He would read the writing on the knife, then cut the body part that was written on it. He would then pick up a different blade at random. It's possible that the person died right away, because among the knives, 1,000 is obviously too many. There was one that told the executioner to stab the target in the heart to death. The person carrying out the execution would have to keep the victim living for as long as possible, which would require them to know a lot about medicine and how the body works. This also made it possible for friends and family to offer gifts to get to the heart of the matter. One change to the execution was that amputations were done instead of simple cuts, but they had to be done in a certain order with only one knife. The waterboarding. It looked like you were about to rest on your laurels. Sad to say, torture still happens in places that aren't ruled by dictators. Waterboarding is by far the most well-known example of this. Water torture is an old method of getting someone to tell you something by making them afraid they will drown. The only difference between this method and waterboarding is that waterboarding is meant to mimic the terrifying feeling of drowning instead of actually drowning the victim. A strip of cloth, a bucket of water, a person to be sprayed, and a badge of power are all you need for waterboarding. Someone is lying on their back with the cloth over their face, which is tilted 10 to 20 degrees. Then water is poured over their face, filling their mouth and nose with water. This is so upsetting that they generally give up information. In some cases, the victim dies, but they can also get brain damage from not getting enough air, lung damage, or broken limbs from fighting against being restrained. The long-term effects on mental health are also horrifying. Even so, the US government said over and over again during the War on Terror that waterboarding was not a form of torture. The military trains people to do waterboarding, and some people have written about their experiences. Chris Jacko, who used to be a military pilot, was waterboarded as part of his training when he was only 19 years old. "It felt like you were drowning in water and couldn't stop it," he says. "I was pushing people away because it was too much for me. I felt like I couldn't breathe because water was going up my nose and down my throat." Even though Jacko knew that his teachers wouldn't really drown him, he still did it. Haven't we made progress as a species?